When I was in 8th grade, my dad splurged and bought his dream car. I was much too young at the time to drive, so I don't remember any of the specs, but the gist is he purchased a convertible BMW Z4. It was silver through and through, with chrome and glass for the accents. It was an absolutely beautiful machine, and had a lot of power underneath that hood. Well, that first year that he bought it, he wanted to go on a road trip with me. A way to celebrate, a way to bond, and a way to break into new ride. He even said he'd give me some driving instructions. All of it sounded fun, so when school got out that summer, we packed up and hit the road for about a week total. We couldn't fit much more in the way of clothes and supplies in the trunk and the back seat. If you've never seen one, Google it. Z4s are very small cars, but it was fun and we hit the road with a good idea of where we were going, as my dad and I had been loosely planning our trip for about a month or two. We'd go north at first, then shoot over west before coming down the coastal highway through California. We jammed music, talked about life, told stories from the good old days, typical father-son stuff. We even told riddles and jokes, some of my favorite pastimes. We saw all manner of beautiful terrain, mostly canyons and valleys throughout the Southwest and the Pacific Northwest. It was cool, and I loved every minute of it. Stopping was a treat too. I was a fat kid growing up, so I loved all that gas station delight food, and we got a lot to eat. Chips, jerky, soda, gut bomb burgers, all of it. Other times we would stop at nicer hotels, and this would prompt my dad to seek out nicer restaurants for us to eat at. It was a cool dichotomy, and seemed to satisfy both of us. There was one night that we rolled into some mid-sized town, and I can't remember the name of it. Litchfield or Litchbrook, something like that. This was one of the stops where we got a nice hotel room. We hit the pool, then wandered around downtown a bit. I remember we were both gawky at all the ladies. Literally every single woman that we laid eyes on was prettier than the last. It's like there's something in the water out here, son, I remember my dad saying. You might be hitting the road on your own tomorrow. After a nice dinner and a walkabout, we decided to head back to the hotel room. I could tell something weird was going on right when I saw the place. There was this small crowd clustered around some cars that were parked funny. My dad didn't seem to bat an eye, didn't say anything about them, so I just kept on cruising too. I didn't want to seem like a big baby or anything, since I guess technically nothing was really going on. Still, it was weird. I remember leaving a lingering eye on that crowd as I closed the door behind me and turned the deadbolt until it locked. We were on the ground floor. Well, the whole hotel was, so it's not like it was super fancy or anything. It also didn't have any kind of great security. It was a standard hotel door, standard double locking system with a deadbolt and chain, a huge viewing window right by the door, and curtains pulled closed over it. Pretty typical. We settle in, and I start eating some peanut M&Ms. This was another staple for these road trips, as they were my dad's favorite candy. We were watching reruns of Seinfeld when I heard the first few shouts come from outside. I turned and peeked, but Dad just kept watching TV. The guy seemed unshakable. You think they're just drunk out there or something? I asked. It's none of our business, was all Dad said. I nodded and felt like I learned a valuable life lesson there. By the time it hit 9 p.m., we're both pretty beat, so decided to turn in for the night. The riffraff outside seemed to have settled down, and we wanted to get out of town by 6 o'clock or 7 a.m. to stay on schedule, so trying to pass out just made sense. We did our bathroom ritual and then promptly went to bed. I didn't fall asleep though. You see, my dad has this magical ability to be able to fall asleep anywhere at any time, no matter what's going on. You're snoring loud as hell, and outside I could hear those voices getting louder again. My anxiety was further amplified by the fact that I was alone, or at least the only one awake. It just makes things that much worse when you're the only one privy to what is actually happening. Outside, it sounded like your pretty average tailgate party. After listening in for a bit, something changed though. Instead of cheering and vibing, it sounded like voices were getting heated, agitated. I kept checking the clock. Around 10:30, the agitation started, and by 11:30 the guys were full on shouting at each other. I could hear a few people trying to mediate, but whatever was happening was quickly getting out of hand. Out of nowhere, the snoring stopped. My dad popped out of bed. He pulled his shirt on and moved to the window, peeked through the blinds. I had my eyes cracked open so I could see his expression. He kept a perfect poker face, just observing whatever was going on out there. My dad was a former Marine, and honestly, we had all heard rumors at family reunions and our get-togethers that in his youth, he beat a man to death during a bar fight, then fled town right after. Lack of evidence kept him from ever going to prison. "What's going on out there, Dad?" I asked. "Just a bunch of drunks," was his retort. Dad had also been sober for a couple of years, had a particular disdain for those that got drunk in public. He was a tight ass is what I'm saying. And now a bunch of strangers had woken him up dead of the night. Any fear I had quickly dissolved. The voices got louder and louder outside, and my dad didn't really miss a beat. He pulled on a pair of shorts and his shoes and started for the door. "There's a gun underneath my pillow," he said. "Keep an eye out and don't open up the door for anyone." With that, my dad disappeared into the darkness. I hopped out of bed and immediately shouldered up to the window. It had one of those big, heavy curtains draped in front of it, the kind that could pass for a comforter. I peeled back one edge and looked out with a single eye. I had nailed those sounds that I was hearing earlier. It was a little tailgate party in the far parking lot of the hotel. One of the trucks seemed to be for the road company of some kind, like highway maintenance or something. It had cones and stuff in the back, the one big decal on the side. Definitely a work truck. My dad approached these guys from the shadows. He skulked around the side of the building, stuck to hard-to-see places. Only once he was pretty much on top of them did he step out and make his presence known. The crowd flinched at first, then turned and got somewhat silent. I couldn't hear the words, but Dad was moving as he spoke, motioning to the hotel room and then his car. Everyone nodded along, then he said goodnight. Dad always gave off this cop energy, so people usually listened to him. He came back to the room, slipped the key in, and then sat on the bed. "So much for a decent night's sleep," he said, checking his phone. "You should try to get a little more rest. Everything should be good now, son." And I did. I was tired as hell from the drive and sitting up all night. It was well past midnight at this point. My eyes were burning. With the brief silence and security of my dad, I slipped off into nothingness. I don't know for how long, but what felt like just seconds later. Shocked awake by a pounding on the door. I remember what my dad said in the moment. "Don't open the door for anyone." But for some reason I had it in my head that he was still outside, that no time had gone by at all, and I'd just fallen asleep while he was having his first little conversation with him out there. I hopped up in a panic and rushed for the door, only to feel a heavy hand come down on my shoulder. Startled, I whirled around, and there was my dad sitting on the edge of his bed. "We're all here. We're all good," he assured me. Just that nonsense outside. He was projecting confidence, but I could tell my dad was a little rattled. Maybe he'd been sleeping too, and now he didn't know what was going on. Whoever was out the door kept banging him and started to holler throughout the walls. "Help me, please. You gotta let me in." Beyond that, we could hear voices from earlier, closing in on the room. Dad took his pistol and went to the window, took a peek, and didn't like what he saw. The guy caught a glimpse of him through the glass, started banging on the window, begging and pleading for us to open up the door. "Please, man, they're gonna kill me out here. Please." "Why? What did you do?" My dad chatted through the glass. He turned to me and pointed to his phone. He told me to call 911. Any kind of talk about death was reason to have cops on site. I grabbed his phone, but in my stupid kid confidence, I dialed 911, but didn't hit the call button. I got off the bed and went to my dad's side and looked out. There was a small mob coming up from behind this guy. Those people from earlier. I looked at the guy at the door, and I didn't really recognize him. He was dressed different from everyone else. That's when I noticed that logo on his clothing. It was the same as the work truck in the corner of the parking lot. "Dad, I think that's his truck," I said, pointing. "What are you saying?" He asked me as quickly as I could. I tried to explain what was running through my mind. This guy was just trying to get to his work truck when the drunk people decided to mess with him. I didn't know if I was actually right, but in the moment it kind of made sense to me. My dad pointed to the guy who was about to start kicking in our door and hollered out a question. "Is that your truck out there?" "Yes." My dad took a sharp breath through his teeth, unbolted the lock, and swung the door open. He didn't let the guy come inside, just stood right in his way. He brought the pistol up to eye level and let everyone outside get a good look at it too. The guy still tried to barrel inside the room, but Dad stayed firm in his way. I just called the police, shouted over the voices. That seemed to get everyone's attention pretty quickly. That's when I realized I never dialed in, but seeing everyone tuck their tail and start to leave, I figured it was all over. The guy at our door collapsed against the exterior wall and started explaining everything. He was staying a couple of doors down. He'd been out having a few beers when he made the walk back to the hotel. Right away, he noticed the commotion around his truck. That being said that he was in town to finish a job, he didn't want anything happening to his equipment. He said he made a simple request for them to please get away from his vehicle. The crowd had been boozed up at this point, and so was that roadway worker. What started as a question quickly turned into a barking match. The solo guy was severely outgunned. One push led to another. Soon the guy was surrounded. He said he squared up and swung his way out of the circle, but they laid a pretty good beating on him. It was obvious. His room key fell out of his pocket during the scuffle. He just went door to door, begging for help while these people chased him around. Well, at least that was the partial story. The overnight clerk saw some of the incident from his office, and he really did call the cops. They dropped in out of nowhere, just like my dad. His cruisers rolled into the parking lot, even without so much as headlights on, let alone a siren. They corralled anyone who hadn't already fled. Then the real story came out. It turned out the roadway worker had been having some beers at a nearby bar, and so had that entire crowd. Words were exchanged before finally the bartender kicked them all out as they wandered the streets talking trash. They recognized the guy's truck in the hotel parking lot. They forewent and bought a case of beer, then literally tailgated on the guy's truck until he showed up, just so they could have that final word. Again, the solo guy started clashing with the group, only to realize there weren't any bouncers to protect him anymore. Next thing he knows, he's banging on a stranger's door, begging for help. When the law showed up, things got real quiet. People scattered, and those who didn't were detained and questioned. Dad and I didn't have to give a statement, and since I wasn't the one who called the police, we just shut the door and got back in bed. The only person that must have got arrested was that roadway worker. His truck was still in the parking lot the next morning when we left. So, this was the story. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Check out our other videos for more content. And remember to share this with your friends. See you next time.